everyone, and welcome to another Scots Way podcast. And I'm joined today by musician and composer Scott Twynholm. We're going to talk mainly about film soundtracks because most recently he worked on James Price's Dog Days, which was shown at this year's Glasgow Film Festival just on Sunday. First of all, hello Scott, how are you doing?
Good, Ali, how are you?
Really well, thanks. Good. So let's talk about Dog Days first. How did you come to work on that?
It was a very, very quick process. I'd worked with the producer, Carolyn, works with Hopscotch Films, and it was a I think one of these co-productions. So there was Channel X, are a London-based production company, and Hopscotch together with the BBC. And I think I was one of, I think, a number of names in the hat. And I'd worked on a few things with Carolyn in the past. Rachel Maclean's feature Make Me Up. And Carolyn, although not directly, was involved in the Alasdair Gray A Life in Progress soundtrack. So I think she pushed for me at least to be heard, and James, she sent two shorts that James had made, Boys Night and I think Dropping Off Michael, and asked me to just have a look at it. I thought it was amazing work, and I was in. Yeah, I said, if you want me, then I'm in. Yeah. So
sorry, on you go.
Yeah, that's how it came about. It was very, very quick, and there was a tight, kind of tight deadline. It really had to be turned around within 3 weeks to a month from that first phone call.
And we were just talking before we started recording that it was on Sunday, as I say, at the film festival, and it got a really warm reaction.
It did. It was amazing. It was completely sold out. It had been programmed in GFF23, and then that sold out very quickly. So I'm not sure what film they flipped it with, but it went into the main GFT1. That also sold out. So I think that's about 400 or 390 capacity. And it was a very warm, like home crowd almost. It was like a home match.
Yeah, I suppose poker on your side a bit.
On your side, and I think, James had a lot of people, obviously everybody involved in the production, from DOPs to dubbing mixers, that everybody was there. So and there was a Q&A with James and a standing ovation, which is very, very rare for a film to receive. Peter Mullen turned up, who James had worked with on The Skint.
Yes.
Like about this time last year. So yeah, Peter turned up and gave his support too. So it was a great day.
Yeah, people don't know that was the series of short films that, was it Channel 4 made them?
I think so. I'm not sure of how the production, but it was a series of short films, of which James did one or two, or worked with Peter on one of them.
Yeah. Really, really good introduction to his work. If people, I think, hopefully, you can still catch them maybe on all four.
I think, like, going back, like the two shorts. I think some of the shorts are on YouTube for watching. So they're excellent. Like Boys Night and Dropping Off Michael. I think they both won BAFTAs. At least one of them won BAFTA. So that they can be seen online.
And it's the plans for Dog Days, you might not know this, but to go elsewhere, or is it coming to TV, or how will people hopefully be able to see it?
Yeah, so it's quite unusual in that it was made for TV. So it was made, I think the BBC saw it as a short, like, mini series. So it's coming out on iPlayer on the 7th of April as 6, like 12 minutes, I think, episodes. So it's coming out episodic. And this was a 60-minute edit, which was shown at the festival. It's like a broadcast version, so that will be broadcast on BBC Scotland. I think also in April, but I don't have a date for that yet. But it will drop onto iPlayer, as I say, 7th of April.
So when you find out that you're going to be involved, what's the process? Is it different every time?
Yes, completely different. A lot of that, I suppose it depends on the project, how far advanced the shooting and editing is. If it's a locked cut and there's a tight deadline, I know there's not too much time for me to what I might call pre-composition or to think or research or read. You know, you have to get into the writing quickly. With something like, there might be, I'm always looking for limitations or a way in. So I spoke to James, he wanted the score. We talked about, you know, instrumentalists. Is it something he saw as being like a hybrid score, part electronic, part like, say, small string section or whatever, but it was just electronic. So it was what I could do on my own. I knew I didn't, it's a gritty, but blackly comedic, and I knew the music couldn't go down the comedy line, that the music just had to support the drama. So it had to be fairly dark in places, that there's themes of, you know, addiction, death, etc. And I knew I didn't want to go down a piano and strings route. I wanted it to be more electronic, but organic electronic, and I just kind of limited the instrumentation accordingly. Yeah. And
how collaborative is that kind of relationship? Again, it probably changes every time, but in this case, how did it work with yourself and James? Did he have ideas about how he thought it should sound?
I think he very much just left it to me. We had a chat, we spotted it with the editor, Mark Fraser, the three of us just like this on a Zoom. So before, I never met James until after most of the music was written. We just went through it on screen, taking notes of where music would be in and out. I went away, started writing. I would send maybe spend first week writing maybe 3 or 4 cues, send them over, and wait on feedback. In James's case, it was seamless. He went for, which is quite unusual, what I did for first time. So there was only one big cue that come back, and it's one of the best notes I've ever got. I think he felt that he wanted to, and some directors are the same. They feel bad that they can't articulate things or talk musically in terms of technically what they would like. But to me, that's not as good as somebody that just talks emotionally about it, or it's too sad, it's too happy, it's too fast, it's too slow. So his comment was, I just wanted this to be more like Tangerine Dream on speed. But I took the expletives out there, but it just basically a license telling me to go a bit madder on it. So
yeah, but that's really interesting, because it means that, I guess, rather than any specifics from someone who has the musical vocabulary, there's interpretation there that gives you a space to kind of interpret it as you want.
Yeah, it's not somebody talking in musical terms, but music as a, you know, what's one person's sad music might another person might get a bit of joy. So it's so subjective, it's very difficult to know, and you just hope you have that the understanding with the director or editor who are equally as important. A lot of the music I've worked in various ways, so music, it might be going more back and forward with the editor, who then slots my music in and will distribute to the director, and then you get feedback kind of that way, or maybe you get feedback from the editor. If the director really trusts the editor, they'll trust their musical like taste and judgment. So it's different every time. But in this case, it was really, really painless, and it was nice that I've been on projects that are drawn out, which is really good if you're in early and you're seeing early rushes. And the film I did last year, Ride the Wave, I was in early with that, and I was having discussions with Martin, the director, maybe 2018, maybe started writing in 2020, then it was halted, and then finished in 2021, and then it comes out in 2022. So that was a long process, and there's good things that come about that, and that you can research, you can experiment, you can make mistakes, you can go back, you rewrite. Whereas this was, okay, we had a call mid October, and it's to be finished mid-November.
Yeah.
You've not got time for that.
And I was wondering, you know, you were in the audience as the film was being shown. Can you enjoy a film when it's your work that's accompanying it as well, or are you listening closely? What's the situation?
Yeah, no, I love it. I think that's the payoff for composers, and I think for other people I know who write. I think that premiere is the party or the payoff for probably a period of hard work. Or I always go through this same. It's like an arc of, you know, you get the gig and you celebrate, or you have a night, you think, oh, I've got a nice project coming up that'll keep me busy. Then the next morning you think, how do I start this one? And then you have a mild panic until you get going. And once you've got your first few pieces of music, maybe you know you're on the right path, then it becomes more enjoyable. But really, once you're in a premiere, you know you can't change it. So I'm not listening as attentively or not as critically as I am in every, you know, if something comes back from the dubbing house, I'm still listening very closely to fade ins or fade outs, or is that, you know, because you know you can change things.
Yeah.
As in an opening, I begin seeing a lot more, hearing things that I might not have noticed before, and just enjoying it more as a complete, enjoying everybody else's work.
Yeah. Seeing how it all comes together at the very end. Yeah.
Yeah.
Can we talk a bit about some of your other work? You mentioned Ride the Wave there, and that's, I mean, it's a fantastic soundtrack as well, but it seems to me it was you say you were writing at the start, and I think you can probably feel that that's the case. Do you feel that you were integral right from the beginning in terms of your music?
I think so. I'd worked with Martin on his previous film, and we got on really well, and I knew he was following Ben the Surfer. He'd spoken to me about it, what his plans were, and then I was in early, so it was almost after a first assembly, they call it. So the film will be assembled, but it jumped around so much just to how we tell the story. And with documentary, it's not like working off script. So I was working on it and speaking to Martin before Ben decided he wanted to go and ride the big wave. So my Martin had no idea where the film was finishing. So he thought he was telling the story of potentially Scotland's first surfing participant at Olympics. So I think surfing was going into Olympics, and that was his thought. The best possible, you know, outcome for this would be Ben competing, and I think that's where he struggled. You know, I know he got it made, but I know that, and he pulled in funding from different places. But it was it's a hard thing with documentary because you don't have that end point. So it's really, really difficult for financiers to, you know, turn around and say, well, what is this? But as soon as Ben decided he wanted to flip from competition surfing to riding big waves, and then they went to Ireland, you've seen the film, you know what happens, but I won't say too much in case people haven't. Then I remember Martin coming back from that trip and saying, I think we might have our end. But even then, they didn't know if there would be more filming. And you know, he'd been following Ben for 4 to 5 years, and I think he just felt it had to finish somewhere, or it could just keep going and going. But I was in early. I wrote. And a film like that is so daunting when you just watch it in silence. Thinking where do you start, and often it's maybe identify 2-3 key scenes where music has to tell the story, and then I'll just focus on a small section. So I was writing some themes, some pieces way back, and a few of those kind of stuck and became the soundtrack. and then developed. And as you go through, you find other things. So then the first things you write, then I go back to, and you incorporate maybe the things you found a bit later on. So it was a very, it was a really good experience as a composer to have that time, and just to be able to change and adapt and tinker the way the story went. I think that I wrote about 5 or 6 openings, for example. It kept changing.
It's such an interesting to hear you say that, because watching the film, it kind of is one of these things that proves that real life is something stranger than fiction, because, you know, you just think it's a really moving film, because you've got this pool of the parents who want the best for their son, but yet what might be the best for their son could be extremely dangerous, you know, and I won't say any more than that, but, you know, you've got all of that emotion in the film. And I think if that was scripted, folk might say, oh, there's too much of this, but that's what real life is sometimes. There is that pull in the different directions. And as he gets towards the culmination of the film, especially if it's not going where the director thought it was going, then you have to take on board that as well, do you?
And I think it was a big, that everything starts for me in conversation and writing. And before starting any music, I'll just, do some writing on what I think it is, and then maybe take that to the director, and we'll discuss it in detail. And it's not a surf. We never saw it as a surfing film.
Yeah.
It was a family story with a backdrop of surfing. So that completely changed things. It wasn't going to be an action adventure surfing score. We knew we didn't want any kind of surfing music cliches. It was the music had to, and Martin's really wanted it to represent Ben's journey and what was inside his head. And he's got lots of other worries in his life and at school, or issues with bullying and whatnot. And I think the music hopefully helps subtly just support that family story, or his parents' anxiety about what could happen, or even for the music to suggest what could happen without being directly. And those were decisions. I thought I used some organ throughout, and because the images are so spectacular, I went in all guns blazing on these shots of the waves and the cliffs. It's like the music's trying to compete with how spectacular those images are, and when I went very small, or almost like chorale or church music, like you're suggesting maybe what could potentially happen while supporting the image as well. So these were all just conversations and things we were trying.
Yeah, absolutely. You couldn't have some kind of big Point Break, just that kind of thing. So another one that you mentioned that you worked on was Alasdair Gray, A Life in Progress. And I mean, with proving that everything is different, this must have been very different again.
Totally different. And I think that it was such a unique little world. Like Alasdair's world is so fascinating. And I was aware of his artwork. I'd read some of his writing. But that on that one, I was in early enough to at least give myself a few weeks of research and writing and reading and rereading Lanark, and then at the tale of Lanark, where Alasdair like talks about his life and growing up and all his influences, and then that played a big part of how I decided to write the score, or what it would be, and all this merging of like fairy tales of Hans Christian Andersen and this all this magic, but then this real element, and thinking how I could do that with the means I had in my studio with a few players as well. So that was an amazing project to be be part of. And that was probably coming on for a decade ago. And there's the Alasdair Gray archive. Yeah. The Sosha, who was his gallerist, runs that, and there's a film been made for that this year that uses some of that soundtrack, and people still come to me, and Alasdair's friends, his niece I met last year, and it's so lovely that people say they listen to that, and it makes Alasdair feel closer to them, or still, alive for them. Yeah. So I think in that way, probably more than any other project, I feel quite proud of that one, if it still elicits that emotion in people who listen to it.
Because it's got samples of his voice on it. Was that your idea to do that, or did that come from the film?
No, that was I felt when, again, like every project, I would just think of supporting the image and supporting the film. It was only after the film came out, then I review like the musical material, and I thought, it could work as a standalone thing, in the same way that Ride the Wave.
Yeah,
that's probably the next one, but not a lot of things I do. I think, well, that won't hold together as a record, or it's too disparate, or there's too many different elements. So if it has its own world and can hang together, then I'll think of putting it out. I had spoken to Kevin Cameron, the director, of using Alasdair's voice in some way, and a lot of the composition started with sampling, but sampling from the film footage itself. So that was there was some lovely scenes with Alasdair talking about the characters he was writing for the mural at Hill Head, for example, and that just sampling his voice, just repeating those, like I thought it's a list song. It's just one of these songs that could be a list, and then thinking I would start that composition with just recording, doing a circuit of the underground, the subway, and recording that journey, and then editing that and trying to base a structure around that with these words, and that kind of influenced the music, which eventually came. But I would say, yeah, it's such a unique thing, and we got to play the soundtrack in Oranmore.
Oh wow!
Alasdair was in attendance, and they showed the film, under his kind of masterpiece of a ceiling. So that was a very special evening.
It was it's a great space. I was at the Grey Day event that was on a couple of weekends ago.
A family thing, I couldn't make it along to that, but that looked amazing. And
it really was. And at the end of the night, I went up to speak to someone on the stage just to say how good they'd been. And you got that view from the stage of the whole thing, and you think, how are people concentrating on what they were doing? Because it's quite stunning.
Oh, it's incredible. And yeah, I think were he alive and fit enough, he'd still be tinkering with it, and he'd still be changing things and saying that's not right, and this has to be bigger, and
Not many people get to leave such a legacy in their city, not just in their city, but in their locale. You think that he's got the heavens above, and he was often drinking down in Oranmore, having a pint underneath this thing that he kind of created. It's something very special.
No, it's very special, and I think on a global scale, I know that I met a few people up from London at the festival that had been going round doing a tour of Glasgow at the weekend, and we're talking about Alasdair, but they said they saw his artworks for the first time, but they weren't aware of him as an artist.
Right.
They were aware of him as a novelist, and I think he's probably known for being a respected novelist in the rest of the world, as in Glasgow, his artwork, and be it on at Oranmore, or his murals and his work at Hill Head Underground. It's so part of our life.
That's just what they were saying, is that you come often when you're going through an underground station, you're rushing to get through it and get out and meet someone or whatever. But every now and again, just to take a step back and look at that incredible mural on at Hillhead, it's something very special indeed. And I think you're right. Strathclyde University couple of years ago, maybe last year, did one of their Alasdair Gray, not festivals, but conferences, where they tried to bring the two sides together, to try to, because they both feed into each other. He obviously did things for his books, he did a lot of illustrations for his books. He did illustrations for other people's books, covers and things like that back in the day. And I think you're right, the balance in the city is more, we see him as an artist and a writer, but hopefully that might get kind of...
Yeah, absolutely.
Are there other projects that you're particularly proud of in terms of film soundtrack that you've done?
Yeah, there was one last year I did called Alone in Venice, which hasn't come out yet. It was, I think the problem it has is it's about 25 minutes, so it doesn't quite, it's a short film, but most short films that get screened in lots of festivals are 15 or 10 minutes. And this was one based on writing by Colm Toibin.
Oh, yes.
So based on a bit of writing he did for the London Review of Books. I think he was researching his book, his Thomas Mann book, The Master, in Venice during the pandemic. And right. the filmmaker Robbie Fraser.
Yep.
Who, I don't know, do you know Robbie? Is he
a little bit? Yeah.
He had the idea that he wanted to, during the pandemic, film places that were normally rammed with people, but film them deserted.
Right.
And Venice being like one of those places. So his idea was originally just to try and get to Venice, take a camera and film it during the pandemic. And then he discovered Holmes' piece of writing in the London Review of Books about just an essay about, quite poetic essay about his time in Venice. He went to the places that, like Mann's Hotel and Death in Venice. And it's such a beautifully shot thing. Robbie couldn't get there, but he used a friend who's based in Paris, Lars Bloomers, to shoot it and direct it. And I did the score. It's like a string quartet and piano. So hopefully that will see the light of day at some point. But it's such a just, I think, like historical record, as well as being a kind of poetic look at what it means. And Tom contemplates, I suppose, looks at the kind of deep history of Venice and going back to plagues, cholera, and then the character that plays Colm walking around with the mask on. You're in the middle of another one. So it's you're back at Thomas Mann's time where they're dying of cholera, or you're looking at the Tintorettos and he died quite late in life during the Black Death, and it's like really fascinating film. Yeah, that
sounds amazing.
Every project I come to, there's elements like Rachel's film. Mm-hmm. Is I would say I'm proud to be involved in that and score that film. Her work is incredible.
I agree. I think she's an amazing visual artist. People, if they don't know her work, they might know her portrait of Billy Connolly, which is in the Barras on the side thing. But her films are really worth checking out.
Yeah, I would check them all out, and that's maybe an example of one that the score was so unique, and you're having to, as a composer, you're having to like go yourself all over the place, because I'd be writing like a folk song or some like parody of orchestral like rom-com to like a techno track to whatever. So it really tests your your chops. But if I was to put all that together in a record, it just wouldn't. I don't think it would tie together at all. It has to be, to make sense, it has to be with the visuals. And that was one I was nervous about doing, because I know Rachel's such a unique artist and has an incredible vision about what she wants to create. And I thought going into that this could be very tricky, because if she has the same detail orally that she has visually, then this could be a very hard gig. But she was absolutely the opposite. Her concern is the visual and story and what she wants to say, and we got on great. She just said, do what you want, and most of the time we got it right. Sometimes there was maybe a rewrite on a few cues, but I think it was a really nice process. And to show a film like that at the London Film Festival and see the reaction to that was brilliant.
And is that something that people can see elsewhere? Is that about, do you know?
I don't know. I don't know if, because Rachel, I mean, her concern, I guess I don't want to speak for her, but I think her concern is in gallery or having her work in galleries. So that film also played at the National Gallery in London, and that would be more than cinemas or film festivals. Her concern will be,
these are gallery pieces rather than
gallery pieces.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. It was an arena. I know it was broadcast under the arena banner, but I don't know if that's still available to watch on any of the streamers or iPlayer. I'm not sure.
What was the name again if people are looking for it?
Called Make Me Up.
Make Me Up by Rachel Maclean. Yeah, I think I did see it at the time, now that you mention it, and if people can get to see it, then they should. But that's interesting that it's mainly a gallery piece of work. Did that change the way that you approached it, knowing that was the case?
No, not really. I think it was just a case of finding the music to work with it. I won't even try and explain the concept. Again, it might ruin it for people who maybe don't know Rachel's work. But as I say, she'll maybe like parody certain things. She's in the film herself, dressed up as a character, and she'll design all the costumes, all the backdrops, working green screen, and it was just finding the right tone to support it.
The reason I ask that is because you have also done work for the theatre as well, and is that something different again?
That is something different again. A very different process, and it's like I think I started working in theatre and film about the same time. Theatre, I seemed to work more in the theatre about a decade ago, and then it slowly kind of moved to working more in film. But in the theatre, obviously, it's a more social environment. And although film's a collaborative environment, you're maybe working with a small amount of people. Could be just one other person that you're going back and forward with. And in the theatre, you're having your meetings, and your jumping off point might be the set, or the speaking with the lighting designer, or the costumes, or whatever. You're in the rehearsal room for read-throughs. It's a balance. You're maybe in rehearsal room more often than not in the first weeks of rehearsal. Then I disappear to write. Then you come back with the music, and it obviously depends. Theatre as an art form is obviously live. So if I can, I will always try and push for live sound or live music. And when that happens, that's a really lovely thing, particularly if I've got a budget to bring in other players, and then just to play with other players. I'm not the most natural performer. I think, although I come from a band background, I think I've found my niche in writing for film or being a studio musician. So I don't feel like performance was ever, like, I guess the most important part of my practice.
Mm-hmm.
But when I do it, and particularly when I play with other musicians, I get such a hit from it that I think, why do I do this more often? And I know that you were saying that Alasdair Gray, Grey Day last week, Jill Lorian played, and on the last, just before the pandemic, we did a show with Birds of Paradise Theatre Company for Edinburgh International Festival called Purposeless Movements.
Right.
And Jill came in on that one, and we performed it together, and that I get a big kick out of that. So both singing, Jill on guitar and violin, and me on keys and guitar, and it was just great fun.
That kind of live thing, I suppose it's in the moment. Is it like playing in bands, or is it a separate thing? Because it's theatre, it's a kind of, it will have a start and a stop and a small run, but I guess being in bands is constant until it stops to be.
Yeah, until it stops to be. And in the theatre, it is different because the focus isn't just on the music. This was, anytime I've performed, it's more likely to be for a dance or a movement piece where music plays an important role, and less so for a drama where music is underscored or subtle. So for this piece, the stories were told primarily through music and movement.
Mm-hmm.
That made the difference, and just having I think sound emanating from something that you can see, the source is far more like rewarding as an audience member than just playback through the speakers. So
absolutely. I went to see a play recently called A Mother's Song, which
yes,
yeah, absolutely. And the band, Finn, I'd spoken to Finn and Tanya, who were director and musical director, about it, and they said the band's going to be on stage. That was very important for Finn, that the musicians would be on stage. And I was thinking, how's he going to do this? Because there's dance and there's all that, but they had them above the stage, and it was just, as you say, to have the live music being played while all this was going on. Fantastic.
Yeah, it just another layer of theatricality. It's something to engage in and watch, and what you get, and every performance is different, and so every performance musically will be different too. It just makes sense. Yeah. And
you also release your own solo music that isn't for film or stuff like that. And I was wondering, because a lot of it's quite different, I think I could probably say that's a Scott Twynholm album, but they are quite different from each other a lot of the times. What inspires a project for you when you think, I'm going to make an album of these songs or music?
I don't know. In my early career, it just seemed to happen. So my first record's under the name Metrovavan, and then while I was in Looper, just seemed to happen. And in my early 20s, or things, I think it's just an amalgam of everything you listen to. I'm absorbing so much music, it almost comes out without too much conscious thought. Just now I find it much more difficult to start, and I'm trying to, in between projects, I have another writing album project on. So the last album project I did was called Textura, which was just really, I'd gone back to study at the University of Glasgow composition.
Mm-hmm.
I started experimenting in various it could be like serial composition or algorithmic composition, and writing a lot of music on the page, not necessarily to be performed, but more to be marked or analysed. And I came out of that, I think, having got a lot from it, but I really had a strong desire to do something that was limited by my own musicianship, and not be writing for for other people. So that was the main impetus for the last record, was to focus on the piano. I'd been interested in just the piano as an instrument as well, and thinking about its weaknesses of, as soon as you hit a note, it dies away. You can't swell like you can on a stringed instrument or a brass instrument. And I'd always liked the electronic bows for guitars, and I just started experimenting with bows. I think people have done that before. It's nothing, like, I realize it's not something completely unique, but I just trying to make these textures and experimental sounds, and I guess in the way that Cage does, or somebody like Hauschka, preparing the piano, and just I'd intended to make an album that was more abstract, drone based, and ambient music, but my limitation was all sound would come from the piano.
Right.
And then while I was at the piano, I think maybe my melodic sensibilities took over, and a few tunes started coming out, and I thought that this wasn't, this isn't what got me going, or it's not my intention, but maybe I should, if a tune presents itself, I felt I would be foolish just to ignore it, because I'd put a rule in place that there would be no tunes. So the longer I spent at the piano, the more little melodic elements come out, and I thought, well, maybe I could combine the texture element with the melody, and it just seemed to come out that way very, very naturally. And so that was my main focus for the record that came out in 2021. Based on that, I'm now trying to start another one, and I have some ideas, but I've not got enough to start. Yeah, I need restrictions. I need some rules, like the last time, the rules of just the piano and just tones, but then you can break them. And I think, I can't remember who said that maxim, that if you end up somewhere that you thought you would end up at the start, then you weren't listening along the way. But I like that idea, but I still need a starting restriction, I think, of just what it means and what it is for me. And I've been a bit obsessing with Robert Bresson, the French filmmaker. Have you seen many Robert Bresson films? And he didn't make many films, but I've been reading he's written a couple of books, and I don't know why, just a gut feeling that I think his writing and his films will give me something. Or so I've been going through his catalogue of films this last month and doing some writing on them, and I don't know if it would be, I thought maybe there's a film that I think, because he was so sparse with score and had very like strict rules about that, his own rules, of that he always felt music fictionalized, so he didn't really use music at all, but he had very interesting sound design, or would maybe use classical music to represent nobility when in certain scenes. So his films are very sparse, but I find them very emotional as well, and in context of today's filmmaking, I find them even more interesting, because there's nothing quite like that just now. Filmmaking and the score, certainly the popular score, is going down another route. So I don't know what that means for my next record, but just I think some of his ideas are maybe absorbing them, and then I'll see what happens. I know I want the piano to be involved again, but I don't want to sit down and make the same process. So I trying to find a way in. That's the thing I find difficult these days.
It seems to me that your music that you're making most recently is as much about ideas as it is about the music itself. You're looking for ideas that will, you many times you said restrictions or things or that, that you'll put on yourself, even going right back to when we were talking about screen music, challenges, I guess, is what I'm looking at. You're almost looking for challenges creatively.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think there's something, I'm not a producer in that sense, that I'm not a gear obsessive. I kind of want the technology to be invisible.
Right.
Almost. And I think, again, going back to, I think I've just been reading too much Robert Bresson, but he shot every film with a 50mm camera and his whole career. And his reasoning was that, I think his resources, as he said, if his resources grew, his ability to use them diminished. And I like that idea of restrictions and just having your own idea and aesthetic and trying to hone into something, rather than, I don't know, having everything open, or just, I could choose, like you'll see, maybe there's I've got a couple of synths that I use for particular things. I've got the Wurlitzer piano, my piano's over this side, I've got the guitars up there, but I don't have a huge technical pro studio space. And I like to, I think my reason for going back to study was I think you get closer to music if you can think about it in your head, rather than, like, I felt a bit guilty trying to be a composer as more a songwriter, or somebody that sits down at the piano or grabs a guitar and comes up with something, rather than a kind of flight of imagination that if you just sit down and work on paper, or do some writing, or scribble some notes, or imagine a sound, that can be much more freeing, I think, than getting into your tropes of sitting at the piano, or maybe getting drawn to your favorite key, or different things. So yeah, it's all about, for me, starting my own projects is increasingly difficult. And I think that comes from working in theatre and film, where the catalyst is provided. So you work with a film like Alasdair Gray, you work with Rachel, or Ride the Wave, you've got a protagonist and you've got the sea, and that's almost a dream for me, because you've got there's your subject matter, so you can go and do as much research as you like, then you make your own rules up and go for it. When I'm free, like, to my own devices, I'm thinking, I'm looking for something. Do I want to use a book as inspiration, or film, or I find, or just kind of like most artists, it's like a kind of half feeling your way through something on a gut feeling, and you don't really know where it's going, but you just have a gut feeling that you should move in this particular direction or another. And I think own music just now, I have a few short films I'm working on, and that's distracting me enough just now, and I will get back to my own writing again very soon.
And going back to your music in films, you had music in films from quite early on, because people were picking them up for soundtracks. Particularly, I'm thinking of Vanilla Sky and the Looper song.
The Looper stuff, that was probably 20 years, maybe more than 20 years ago now. And we had written that second album, the Geometrid, and then very quickly we found out it had been released on Sub Pop in the States. And I mean, none of us, I'm not sure if Stuart has written film music. I think he's done bits and pieces, but back at that time, our concern wasn't with, my concern wasn't certainly with thinking about being a film composer. All we wanted to do was write songs and tour and release records. And Cameron Crowe had, the way I believe it came around is he liked the record and he was playing it on set. So in scenes with Tom Cruise and Cameron Diaz and Penelope Cruz. And then when it came to cutting the film, 2 tracks stayed in, from the temp, and then we got the main track in the trailer, which was a boon. I don't think there's any way. People say to me now, like, you know, I say I've kind of, I'm regressing and scaling in my career. I started off in Hollywood, and now I'm kind of working back. But I don't think there's any way of making that kind of serendipitous happen again. It might happen if somebody could pick up a track from MD. There's plenty of bands and songwriters that have, you know, songs placed in ads or films, and it's a nice thing when it happens. But I don't think you can't aim for it, or you can't expect it to happen. You just have to write the music you want to write and put it out, and if it happens, then so be it. But it can be such a, I mean, it's difficult for, I feel, for young bands, like to make a living selling music is almost, I would say, impossible now. I don't know, with the streaming platforms. So if you're doing live things and selling CDs and merch and have a certain following, maybe you can make a living. But if there's 4 of you in a band or more, it's very difficult. And I've got friends who are successful bands that tour worldwide, and you know, just doing the maths of if you're flying to, say, Japan to do a couple of dates with band and crew, then it's difficult. It's really difficult.
A couple of film festivals ago, it must have been quite a while ago, I was talking to someone who was involved in a film, and they had been a member of the Polyphonic Spree. And I really wanted to ask, how did you ever make any money touring the world with this huge band of people? But you're right, I think it's increasingly difficult. And I also think that time when Vanilla Sky soundtrack, Cameron Crowe was making movies that were always stuffed with great music, and so were a lot of other people. That seemed to, now I think we're back more to maybe composed soundtracks rather than the pop soundtrack, if for want of a better word.
Yeah, I know that pop soundtrack seemed to explode about that late 90s, and there was a few of them. Cameron Crowe was probably a big part in that. Maybe less so now. A film like Paul Thomas Anderson, Licorice Pizza.
Yeah.
Like last year was a great pop soundtrack, but then still, I think he still had composed. There was a main theme that Johnny Greenwood.
Yeah.
Still a bit composed for it, so but I think if you get the right composed music, I think it's hard to beat if it's done well. And I think a lot of filmmakers, you know, feel that, unless you're wanting to set it like Licorice Pizza, unless you want to set it in a certain time and place, then maybe the pop music of the day plays a big part in that.
Well, Scott, it's been really great talking to you. I thanks so much for taking the time to do it.
You're welcome. I enjoyed it. It's great.
And we'll be back soon with someone completely different.